It's time to DeepCool your PC with the FK120 Performance fan. Let's jump right into the data about this DeepCool fan. Here's the basic spec information for the FK120 by DeepCool. It is a pretty much bog standard 120mm fan, standard thickness of 25 millimeters, fluid dynamic bearing, 12 volts, 1.2 amps, 500 to 1850 RPM, 69 CFM, and 2.19 millimeters of H2O, and 28 decibels. First up is my case airflow simulation test. This test has two primary purposes. The first one that I consider the most important is to see how the fan dissipates air. So in an ideal world, the most perfect fan in the world would have zero air velocity loss as you got farther away from it. So this would exclude all types of aerodynamic losses. All fan losses would basically mean that the fan perfectly concentrates the airflow right out the back of the fan with zero air resistance. But we don't live in that kind of ideal world, so we'd expect some loss. So what kind of loss do we expect? Well, we want the line to be as flat as possible, and we want it to be as linear as possible. That indicates that it has a very slow drop in performance and that the air more or less is being pushed straight out the back of the fan as opposed to being shot out to the sides. You might say, why is that important? Well, if the air is shooting off to the sides, is it going towards the back of your case, towards your CPU air cooler or VRM components or anything like that that needs additional cooling? Well, no, it's not. That brings us to the second way to look at this data, and that is as a case simulation, which is basically what it is. It's designed to hold a 180 millimeter size fan, so it's pretty representative of most cases on the market. And I took 4 data points, the first one at 6 inches, then at 9 inches, 11 inches, and 14.5 inches. And each of those is representative of a different size case. So 6 inches is representative of a very small case where you need to get the air wiggling, waggling through the entire case, or very short distance throws. 9 inches is about the smallest I found in a more or less standard type layout case, front to back airflow. But still a small form factor type case. 11 inches would be representative of a pretty much standard mid-tower lot like the Fractal Design Meshify 2C, I believe, and the Corsair 550D from, well, 2010, 11, 12, something like that. And 14.5 inches is representative of a big case. Something along the lines of the Fractal Design Torrent would be a big case. So the idea is, how fast is the air moving by the time the air would get to your CPU cooler, whether that's a radiator, an AIO, a heatsink, whatever. You want that air to be traveling as fast as possible, because then the fan itself has to do as little work and it actually improves cooling throughout the entire case. Now that the explanation is out of the way, the data points were taken at basically every 20, 40 RPM, so 20, 40, 60, 80, 100% PWM fan signaling, and the RPMs that actually achieved are listed at the bottom, and this is the way they looked. But all this doesn't mean anything unless we compare it to something. So next up is basically the data compared against noise normalized control fan. My control fan is based off of the Noctua A12X25 with 3 parts A12X25 to 1 part A14. 140 millimeter fans and larger tend to do better in the case airflow test because they have a better ability to fill the volume of air so that you really don't get that performance drop. In the end, they act more like it's a CFM test, cubic feet per minute, than a airflow dissipation, how does the air actually travel through the case type test. So there is something to be said about getting larger diameter fans. So back to this. The control fan, based off that, and the noise level for my noise normalized testing is based off of my current test methodology of 40 decibels, and that's 40 decibels with the microphone almost against the fan itself. And 40 decibels is representative of the A12X25 spinning at around 1,200 RPM, which I found to be particularly silent when I used those fans on my old AIO in my Corsair 550D, where I just heard a gentle whooshing sound of air coming through the AIO itself. So that's why I chose that decibel reading. And from the data graphs, or the lines, we can see that the FK120 looks like it performs a little bit better than the control fan. When we take a look at how things look at 100% PWM fan signaling, we can see once again that the FK120 looks like it's still outperforming my control fan, even though it's a little bit. So being better than that fan indicates a good performing fan, or even a fantastic performing fan. Being on the line represents basically a good fan, and being under it doesn't necessarily mean the fan is bad unless it's way off. But they represent less than what I would consider a good fan, something that you would want. Next up is comparing the fan against a whole bunch of other fans that I've, tested. So this pink line right here that's a little bit bolder than the others is the FK120, and you can see that it's towards the top of the graphs. Now, the very best I ever tested so far was the Gentle Typhoon with the current noise testing methodology. This is noise normalized again. So the FK120 is definitely a very good pick. It's beating out things like the Tough Fan 12, the A12X25, the Silence 4 Pro 120, and the Wonder Snail, which I found to be particularly good. But you can see that a lot of the better ones tend to congregate around this point right at the end. So you need to take it all with a grain of salt, depending on how big your case is, that they all tend to equalize as you get farther away. So if you are really in a small case, you can get a top performer even in a 9-inch case, but as you get further away, they sort of more congregate down into each other. And moving to 100% PWM fan signaling, the FK120, well, it becomes more middle of the pack. It's not quite as high as some other top performers, but it's also not spinning as fast. So kind of like with that for everything, you need to determine what you consider to be the most valuable thing. And on this graph, you can see the RPM that it was running at, as well as the noise value. So for example, the FK120, it's 2000 RPM, made 47 decibels of noise. That is right on par with the A12X25, putting it as a very good, performer. While, for example, the Silence 4 Pro is at 53 decibels and is spinning at nearly 3000 RPM. Mind, there is some within tolerance for fan RPMs. And once again, you can see that a lot of them tend to congregate around the same sort of air velocity as you get farther away from the case. But based on the FK's performance with compared to the other fans, it is definitely doing a very good job for a 120 millimeter fan at creating a good airflow from front to back of the case, and would definitely be worth pairing 2, 3, if your case can fit it, 4 of them in a row. Next up is the 9-inch mark, airspeed versus decibels. So this fan behaved a little bit weirdly. So increasing in noise value, increasing in air velocity, and then it jumps back. The reason for this jump is I found a harmonic frequency within the fan at around the 40% PWM fan signaling mark, where it just created a lot of noise without a big increase in air velocity, while then when you shift it up to 50%, it dropped down in noise very significantly. So buyer beware basically with this fan. It also meant noise testing was very odd to do, because depending on where I took my averages, so I do a linear interpolation to get the noise normalized value if it doesn't land at the precise 40 decibel mark. So I could take it on the low side and then average is lower. I can take it on the high side and average is higher. It's really hard to determine which way to do it. So just beware with this fan that there may be some harmonic frequencies in it that are not present in many other fans that I've tested so far. So that's why it gave it some very interesting results. So it gains performance and it follows the path a lot like the Arctic P12, and then all of a sudden jumps up and joins the likes of like the Tough Fan 12 and the other extraordinarily high performing fans. So it's very interesting in that regard, and definitely warrants for some retesting. I'm in the process of redoing my entire noise testing process to upgrade it to make it more consistent and trying to make it basically better in every way. So definitely going to be taking a close eye on this and seeing if it remains consistent or if it's just something about the current way I've been testing it. Forgot to mention the top performer here is the Gentle Typhoon. Okay, moving on to RPM versus airspeed through my CPU air cooler, which is the Noctua U12A, the single tower dual fan with the A12X25s. So there are two graphs. To the top left is better, to the bottom right is worse, same on both graphs. The left graph is airspeed vertical versus RPM horizontal. On the right one, we have airspeed again vertical and noise level as horizontal. So, what can we use this data for? Well, on the left one, basically this is a raw performance data for how good is the fan. How well do the blades do their job at pushing air? Well, we can see on the graph, they do a very good job. They follow the control and beat it by a little bit as we reach the higher RPMs, which is very interesting. And if we take a look at the noise values, well, it's kind of wonky, again, because of the harmonics going on in it. You could almost say that it was going to follow and beat it if it wasn't for this harmonic frequency. But it's following a similar-ish trend. It's beating it out by a little bit. So I would say it's potentially good, but be warned, there may be harmonic frequencies that make this fan less than desirable. Next up is, again, through the CPU cooler, but now I've added all the other, well, not all the other, but some applicable fans that I think are very representative of fans on the market that seem good, popular, and kind of represent bad to good categories. So the data on this has several other keynotes that I want to talk about. The first thing is this little chart list right there. And that is, I fairly recently, did a test where I figured out what the maximum performance was from my CPU air cooler, as well as, for single fan, what each air speed is associated with a particular wattage. So this is, again, for my specific CPU air cooler, the U12A, and my specific CPU, which is the 11700K. 0.5 meters per second of airflow gives me 130 watts of cooling. If I'm moving air at 3 meters per second, I get 250 watts of cooling. And I have the other kind of key data points listed right there. Now, your CPU may not have the same performance value, but if you don't, but you would see performance gains by switching to a better fan if you have a worse fan. And again, this is noise normalized. Now, what if you have a different CPU cooler than me, whether it's a radiator, an AIO, or some other heatsink, basically? Well, you would see performance gains, but it would be hard to say how much performance gain you get, because fans that are better at high airflow will do better for a less dense fin stack, while ones that are more pressure optimized are going to see better performance gains than those airspeed pressure optimized ones in a tighter fin stack. And that's true on both radiators and heat sinks. But true on all sides are, if you're going from the P12, the Arctic P12 down here, and you're jumping to like the Ventro Pro is the same as the Gentle Typhoon, you're going to see a performance gain. Or you could see a reduction in noise value. Let's say you don't like my particular noise value. You think that that's still too noisy. Well, you could back off that noise value, again, if you're using this one, and now your fan is even quieter for the same amount of cooling. So that's the ways you could use this as a general rule of thumb data. But if you're looking at the FK120 and you already have it because you bought a DeepCool CPU cooler, you can be rest assured that it is a very good fan. Matter of fact, it beats out the A12X25 in my current testing methodology, the Tough Fan 12. There are very few fans better than it. And at this time, I also should note the errors, the flaws in my measurements. So currently with noise testing, my error is around plus or minus 4 decibels. I know that's a lot because every 10 decibels is a doubling in noise value. I'm doing my testing in my office, and it's not particularly noise isolated, and I'm using a microphone that I use for, well, my voice recording right now. So I really appreciate Patreon support to allow me to acquire better testing equipment. I find it very helpful, or if you want to sponsor me, that would also be extraordinarily helpful. But as for what you can do right now is hit that subscribe button, and that way YouTube will help me out. But I've been revamping my whole testing methodology for noise testing, and I've gone it down to what I think is about 2 decibels plus or minus, which is a huge improvement. It's basically twice as accurate. And also I'm no longer placing the microphone as close to the fan. But it also means it's more work to try to make the environment as quiet as possible when I do the testing. As for airspeed, well, the airspeed on my anemometer is plus or minus decimal point 1 meter per second. So fans that are within 0.1 meters per second, so let's say the SilentWings 4 Pro 120 and the FK, could be considered functionally equivalent in airspeed. But in practice, they are not. I tested each one fan 3 times to get the most consistent data point possible. So they do average out to the FK just beating out the SilentWings 4 Pro 120, even though that's technically within the margin of error for my anemometer. So it's just notes I want to make sure I'm clear about. Now, moving things on to the way things look at 100% PWM fan signaling. So on this graph, we'll have the fan name, the RPM, and the noise it was creating. Here, the FK120 drops back in performance because this graph is dominated by the 3000 RPM fans. They just kick butt, like seriously. And you will note that these fans technically should allow me to see higher than 250 watts on my CPU. However, the 11700K doesn't really go beyond that without really tinkering with it, which I really haven't done. I just use auto overclock basically. But as we move down, there's the Ventro Pro, which is the General Typhoon. You see the General Typhoon itself is actually slightly less performance, so that's margin of error within the fans. And the FK120 is definitely very good. Here's the A12X25, slightly below it, but if we take a look at their noise values, they are very similar. So indicating all around, the FK120 is overall appears to be a very good fan. Taking a look at the same, well, similar data, but from a slightly different perspective, and this is airspeed through the cooler versus decibels. You'll notice that it's cut off to only show applicable areas. So right here in this blue line is the FK120, and we got that beautiful little joggle in it. And we can see that before the joggle, it'd be technically underperforming, but I feel like this line would actually be doing something like this, but we hit a harmonic frequency right there. So I'm not sure if it would be doot, 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 ding, ding, or precisely where it is, but we're basically hitting it. But it's still indicating a very good performer. Not the best, but a very good performer. Down here is like the Arctic P12, and up here we have like the Mobius OC and the General Typhoon, while right here in the middle we have more like the A12X25 and the SilentWings 4 Pro 120. Next up is CFM testing. So CFM, in my opinion, is just purely a scientific test. It is a lot less important than my real-world case simulation, and as well as a Thru heatsink. So CFM is a lot like doing the radiator type testing. You're funneling the air through a small tube to get how much air it pushes. So if the air gets shot off technically to the sides, it's still being funneled down the tube, so you see less variation. Mind, if the fan has a tendency to blow air out towards the sides rather than straight down the middle, you will see a general lower air velocity, but it hides more of the losses than you would see in basically my testing, or at least in my opinion. But it is still a good way to get more performance data, basically. More data is more better. So right here in the RPM versus CFM, you can see that they are perfectly aligned. This is very different than what we saw before, where they weren't quite as well aligned. Again, better is over here, worse is over there, so they're perfectly aligned. And when we take a look at the noise data, you can see that they have a tendency to be more closely aligned than they were in the earlier graphs. Again, this is indicative of what I've just referred to as it being more of a scientific test. It's what a lot of other reviewers do. Continuing our trend with noise normalized value, or CFM values, this one is noise normalized. Where does the FK rank? Well, it is definitely a good performer. Here's the A12X25 at 47.1 cubic feet per minute of airflow. There's the FK at 56.5. The AF120 Elite from Corsair beats it out just by a little bit, and the General Typhoon is right there at the top. Here's the Silence 4 Pro 120. And let's see, here's the P12 from Arctic, and the blue line there is my control. Moving on up to 100% PWM fan signaling, we have the fan name, the RPM was running at, and the noise value, and each data point has the CFM it achieved, and the FK120 is basically right in the middle of the pack. It's honestly I just knocked on my microphone, I'm sorry if you got a loud burp. It's honestly not a bad value, especially for its noise value. If you look at the fans around it, the Arctic Bionics and the P12 ARGB, they're both much noisier fans. So it's honestly a good result for its noise value. Last but not least, for the CFM testing, we have CFM versus decibels. And we see the same sort of trending where it's with the main group of basically better fans, but not quite in that best category. Again, with current noise testing methodology. All right, let's go ahead and jump to the open box experience. Okay, now that we've finished going over the data, let's do the open box experience. So it comes with this fairly basic box. It's got some basic spec information on the back. It comes with some screws and an information card in there, and that's about it. And then you got the fan itself. All right, so let's take a closer look at this fan. So I think that this fan blade design looks pretty cool. Just, on the box, the DeepCool's little symbol, I think it looks quite excellent. Let's talk about the overall frame design. So first, the tips of the blades are fairly close to the edge of the frame. So this led in the pull application. It created a high-pitched noise, but it was fairly quiet. So I would call it more or less acceptable if you wanted to use it in a pull application on your heatsink or in a radiator of some kind. But it would not be the absolute best choice. But that does depend on the heatsink or radiator design. Some may be better or worse than others, but on my heatsink, the U12A, it was acceptable but not the best. Going more over the frame design, it's a nice square shape. So this means that it seals up very nicely when hooked up to a radiator. So a single AIO radiator like you find on a lot of pre-builts, this should create a nice seal so that all the airflow will get pushed through that radiator. And if you are on a larger radiator like a 120, or not 120, a 240, when you have two of them next to each other, they're going to create a nice seal next to each other so that all that precious airflow is going to get shoved through the radiator to create maximum cooling effect. The edges of it have a nice rubber vibration dampener, which will help reduce the amount of vibrations traveling into the case. The struts on the frame are nice and thin, except for this one, which is extra thick, but the other ones are extra thin compared to a lot of other fans. The shape on them will help guide flow a little bit, but their main purpose is actually just to get out of the way of the airflow, which is what I would consider excellent. This one strut could use some engineering improvement, but it's not terrible considering everything else about it. And it's got some nice, a little bit of a flow diffuser on the back. On the front here, it has this little groove, which is literally just there for style. This will serve no functional purpose. There's no inlet design in these blades at all. So it's just up to the blade design. So a lot of other fan blades are either basically straight shot from the inner hub to the outer hub, or they actually reduce as they get to the outside. These actually kind of do the opposite. They're taller at the outside and substantially shallower on the inside. Like if you look on the hub, they are way low. I would love to do an analysis of this fan running it through CFD software, just to do like that actual airflow analysis as to exactly why it might be doing that. But I can talk about what's going on with the shape. So the blades are fairly close together with a good amount of overlap, which is great for pressure applications. And they are moderately flat. They're definitely a more pressure hybrid type blade design. And it did perform well in case airflow and in heatsink airflow, but it did have some issues going on with this overall design. There are a number of harmonic frequencies that I discovered with this fan where it will create a lot of extra noise at given RPMs. One of them I found was at 50% RPM, and I couldn't discover where the other one was, but as I moved the RPM up in speed, it would greatly increase in noise, and as it moved past a particular RPM, it would drop off again. So I think a lot of that has to do with how thin these blades are, that they'll just vibrate a little bit, and then you get this harmonic frequency creating a whole lot of noise. So if you're not in those harmonic frequencies, this is a great fan, but accelerating and decelerating, you may pass through a harmonic frequency, generating a lot of extra noise temporarily. So you may just want to be aware of when you use this fan yourself, finding those harmonic frequencies and trying to make sure that you set the PWM signals at other RPMs or signal values so you're not hitting those frequencies. So the blade design, like I said, is fairly flat, so this is a little bit tended towards pressure applications. The backs are actually, the backs are very flat. Very, very little curvature. The top of them has a little bit, but not much. These are pretty much just flat blades. So relatively unremarkable other than them being like really thick and then getting super narrow towards the inside, which is pretty abnormal for a lot of other fans. They tend to be a little bit wider at the tip as they have this curve, but not also steep, starkly inward into the middle. So it creates almost this turbine-looking blade when it's standing still. So I think it looks pretty cool. Let's jump into our value proposition now. All right, we just finished the open box. Let's take a look at the value proposition for this fan. So we're going to try to make this quick. First up is the case airflow test at the 6-inch mark. Here's at noise normalized, here's at 100%. So noise normalized values is more important for case airflow in my opinion, because if you're running your case fans at 100% PWM fan signaling, something has gone terribly wrong in your case and it's badly overheating. So where does the FK land? Well, it is right towards the top of the graphs. It is not the best. The TL G12, the Thermalright G12, is my current leader at being the very best. But it is definitely way up there, and I would say it's very good. Even if you're taking a look at it 100% fan signaling, it's still ranked very well, but not quite as well as other fans. Moving on to the 11-inch mark, where the 11-inch mark is the transition from basically pressure fan to airflow fan. So fans that are better at creating that concentrated airflow are going to rank better here, while at the 6-inch mark it matters a lot less if they spew air in every direction or they create that nice funnel or tube of airflow that punches to the back of the case to cool down all your vital components. So right here you see that the FK120 ranks very well once again. Well, several other fans that ranked very well before have kind of dropped away. The TLG12 still manages to hang on because it is just a cheap fan, but the P12 Max is basically top at 100%, but at noise normalized values you can see where things rank out. Next up we have the value proposition through my CPU AirCooler. I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but the value proposition is basically airflow divided by money. So more money, less airflow, less good value. Before we get into the value proposition, the FK120 is a $20 fan. So in this day and age, it's a good middle of the road price, as opposed to like the A12S25, which is more like a $30 fan. So with the CPU coolers, we can see that the FK120 is ranked quite well. The TLG12 is ranked slightly better than it, but now we have like the Storm series from Arctic ranking quite well, especially noise normalized values. But once we take a look at 100% PWM fan signaling, which I consider to, you basically want both of these for a CPU cooler. But 100% is very important. The P12 Max is a top contender. The TLG12 manages to hang on as being a top contender. And how should you use this data? Well, if you're on an extraordinarily tight budget, like budget is king, you would use this data 100%. You would find the best bang for your buck. So like the TLG12, which ranks very well, probably as a case fan, and the Storm series for your CPU cooler, or even the P12 Max for your CPU cooler. You would just pick out whichever one suits your fancy for the best bang for the buck. If you have a middle of the road budget, so you've got some extra cash to spend on a little bit more nicer fans, then you'd weigh my performance data with this value proposition to pick out what the best ratio is for you. And if money's unlimited and you don't care, well, I don't know why you're watching this part of the video. No offense, it's actually interesting. But you would just buy whatever fans you liked. RGB fans are more expensive, so they do worse in this value proposition. But that's how I would use this data. Moving on, CFM. So the FK doesn't quite do as well here compared to the other tests, but it's still ranked towards the top, and it's dropped back quite a bit at 100% PWM fan signaling. Well, we've reached the end of the video, and I want to thank you all for watching it. It means a lot to me that you all watch my videos and you actually make it to the ends. I have the raw data here in a second, but seriously, please subscribe. If there are any fans that you're interested in having me check out, please, please, please leave it down in the comments down below. I read all the comments and I try replying back to them with, I guess, whatever you all are talking about. I have constructive criticism for how I can improve my videos. I try iterating on it every time. I'm learning how to essentially film it better and that sort of thing. Audio croning and stuff is not my cup of tea. Right now it's just me, my cell phone camera, and I get it done. But I guess let's check out the data and we'll wrap it up. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. I wanted to thank you for watching my video on the DeepCool FK120. For more fan videos, please check out my YouTube channel. I have lots of fan videos, both coming out and coming up, already published. Please subscribe for more content. If you want to see me test any particular fan, please leave it in the chat description down below, and I'll try to check them out. Check out my Patreon page, and I'll see you next time. Here is the raw data for the FK120. I say you can copy down this data, use it in your own Excel calculations or whatever you really want to do with it. However, if you do use it in any sort of publication, I do ask that you reference me and my channel as the basically source that you got it from, because I spent a lot of time and effort gathering all this data. It's more than an hour and a half per fan of data collection, and at least 30 minutes of data or graph updating, and another hour plus of just putting it into PowerPoint for presentation purposes, plus another hour to record and get the filming organized and uploading and all that fun stuff. So if you're going to reference it in anything, please do reference me, because it was a lot of work and effort. It's a labor of love. I find fan testing very interesting. It's just the presenting part is a challenge. Anyways, thank you for watching. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.